I and my wife have been married for 8 years and have two amazing kids. We've always been on the same page about our family size until recently, and now I feel like I'm going crazy. Before we got married, we had multiple serious conversations about how many children we wanted, and we both firmly agreed that two was our magic number. When we had our second child, my wife experienced serious complications during delivery. She hemorrhaged badly and ended up hospitalized for nearly 3 weeks, followed by a grueling 6-month recovery period. It was honestly terrifying. I thought I might lose her at one point. After she recovered, she was the one who kept saying how relieved she was to be done with pregnancies forever, and even suggested I get a vasectomy last year. Our life has settled into a manageable rhythm now. I work as an emergency services dispatcher with rotating 12-hour shifts, and my wife recently returned to teaching part-time after being a stay-at-home mom for 6 years. Financially, we're stable, but definitely not rolling in cash. We're still paying off medical debt from our son's complicated birth, and we just bought a modest 3-bedroom home last year that fits our family of 4 perfectly. For context, I've always been super involved with our kids. Even with my weird shift schedule, I make sure to handle my fair share of everything. School drop-offs, doctor appointments, bedtime routines, you name it. My wife and I have always been a solid team when it comes to parenting. About 3 months ago, something shifted. My wife started making these casual comments about, wouldn't it be nice to have just one more? At first, I thought she was joking or feeling nostalgic since her sister just had a baby, but the comments kept coming, gradually becoming more frequent and emotional. I gently reminded her of our agreement and the medical risks she'd face, but she'd change the subject or say she was just thinking out loud. Last night, everything came to a head. I walked into our bedroom and found her crying while scrolling through baby photos of our kids on her phone. When I asked what was wrong, the floodgates opened. She launched into this emotional plea about how desperately she wanted just one more baby, and she said she would resent me forever if we stopped at 2 children. I tried to stay calm while reminding her of our original agreement, her difficult recovery after our son, and our financial limitations. She dismissed all of these concerns with a wave of her hand, saying, "People make it work with much less all the time." Then she suggested a compromise. She said I could be less involved with the third child since it would be the one she wanted. When I asked her to clarify what the hell less involved meant, she explained I wouldn't need to do as many night feedings or diaper changes and could focus more on our older children instead. I told her I could never parent one child differently from the others. That's wrong. Any child deserves full commitment from both parents. She got defensive and accused me of not caring about her feelings and dreams, saying she felt cheated out of the larger family she always wanted. "But you never mentioned wanting more than 2 kids before," I said. "For years after our son was born, you kept saying how happy you were to be done with pregnancies." She just shrugged and said, "People change their minds. Women especially have the right to change their minds about their reproductive choices." After 2 hours of going around in circles, I finally laid it out straight. I told her she needed to either accept our family of 4 or consider ending our marriage so she could find someone who wanted more children. I know that sounds harsh, but I don't see any middle ground here. You either have another child or you don't. She called my ultimatum cruel and unfair, but I maintained that there's simply no compromise possible on creating another human life. I'm now sleeping in the guest room, and the tension in the house is unbearable. Our kids definitely sense something is wrong. Edit. Forgot to mention that when I brought up the medical risks of another pregnancy based on her previous complications, she revealed she had secretly consulted with an OBGYN who said another pregnancy was possible with careful monitoring. Finding out she had these medical consultations without even mentioning it to me was another shock. Part of me wonders if I'm being unreasonable. I love my wife deeply, and seeing her so upset is killing me. But I also feel strongly that bringing a child into the world should be a mutual decision with full commitment from both parents. Having a baby should be a mutual decision with full commitment from both parents. It's a lifetime commitment that affects every aspect of our lives: finances, careers, the well-being of our existing children, our relationship, everything. I'm also hurt that she seems to view my role as a father as optional or adjustable. The suggestion that I could be less involved with a third child Feels like she doesn't value or understand my commitment to being an equal parent. I couldn't imagine treating one of my children differently just because they weren't planned or wanted equally by both parents. That's just setting up a kid for psychological issues down the road. The most frustrating part is that she keeps framing this as me denying her something she deserves, rather than acknowledging we made this decision together years ago. If she had expressed wanting a larger family from the beginning, I might have considered it carefully, or we might have realized we were incompatible. But to change the game plan after 8 years of marriage and 2 kids feels like a bait and switch. I've noticed she's been spending a lot more time with her sister lately, who has 4 kids and has always been vocal about the more the merrier when it comes to family size. I can't help wondering if her sister has been influencing her perspective. My wife has also been sending me links to articles about only child syndrome and middle child syndrome, suggesting our children would be somehow psychologically damaged without another sibling. I'm at a loss about what to do next. I love my wife and our family, but I feel like she's asking me to break a fundamental agreement we made together. Any advice about navigating this impossible situation would be greatly appreciated. I want to save my marriage, but not at the expense of bringing another child into the world that I'm not fully committed to raising. Now for the first update. Holy crap, I didn't expect my post to blow up like this. Seriously, I've been overwhelmed by all your comments and messages. Thank you all for your support and advice during this incredibly difficult time. It's been 2 weeks since the baby ultimatum conversation with my wife, and things have been tense, to put it mildly. We've barely spoken beyond necessary discussions about the kids and household stuff. The atmosphere at home is tense. Our 6-year-old asked me yesterday why mommy and daddy don't laugh together anymore. I suggested marriage counseling last week, thinking a neutral third party could help us communicate better. My wife immediately shot that down, saying, "This isn't something a counselor can fix, since it's a fundamental disagreement about our family's future." That response honestly worried me more than anything. It seems she's already decided there's no middle ground worth exploring. The past few days, she's been sending me links to articles about only child syndrome and middle child syndrome. I've stopped responding to these messages, which makes her send even more. My phone is constantly lighting up with 10 reasons siblings are essential for development type articles. Seriously, where does she find this stuff? Yesterday, everything reached a breaking point when I was looking for some pain relievers in her nightstand. I had a killer headache from the stress. That's when I found an unopened birth control prescription refill hidden under some books. For context, she's been on the pill consistently since our son was born, something we both agreed on. After the kids went to bed, I confronted her in the kitchen, holding the unopened package. I'm not proud of how I handled it, but finding that prescription was shocking. She looked guilty for a split second before switching to defensive mode, saying she wasn't actively trying to get pregnant but wouldn't be devastated if it happened accidentally. I felt completely betrayed. Stopping birth control without telling your partner is a major violation of trust and consent, as many of you pointed out in the comments of my original post. When I told her this, she burst into tears, saying she felt desperate and that I wasn't taking her needs seriously. "You don't understand what it's like to have this biological need," she said. When I brought up the medical risks of another pregnancy given her previous complications, she dropped another bombshell. Apparently, she had secretly consulted with an OBGYN who said another pregnancy was possible with careful monitoring. Finding out she'd hidden both stopping her birth control and these medical consultations was just, wow. I asked her what else she wasn't telling me. That's when she admitted she'd already started converting our home office into a potential nursery when I was working night shifts. She'd been moving my desk and computer into a corner of our bedroom bit by bit. I'd noticed things being rearranged, but assumed she was just organizing. I walked to the former office and found it partially cleared out, with baby items from storage arranged on shelves. Seeing our son's old crib reassembled in the corner made everything real. This wasn't just talk anymore. She was actively preparing for a baby, regardless of my feelings on the matter. I told her I would be sleeping separately from now on and using protection if we ever became intimate again, which feels unlikely at this point, TBE. I can't trust her to be honest about contraception, and the thought of intimacy with someone who would trick me into fatherhood feels wrong on so many levels. I made it clear that creating another life should be a mutual decision and that her attempts to force the issue or trick me were destroying my trust in our relationship. She just sat on the couch crying, saying I was being cruel and that she was running out of time to have another baby. She's 32, so this feels a bit dramatic, but I understand the biological clock anxiety. Despite her refusal, I contacted a marriage counselor anyway and scheduled an appointment. I told her I would go with or without her because our marriage is in serious jeopardy. To my surprise, she reluctantly agreed to attend, though she maintains it won't change anything about her desire for another child. I've also arranged to take a few days off work to spend time with our children. They can sense the tension between us, and I want to make sure they know they're loved and that none of this is their fault. Our daughter has been extra clingy lately, and our son has started having tantrums again after months of good behavior. Several commenters suggested I document everything. Thank you for that advice. I wouldn't have thought of it. I've started keeping detailed notes of our conversations and her actions regarding this situation. I'm not planning for divorce, but after the birth control deception, I realized I need to protect myself and our existing children. I'm still hoping we can work through this. I love my wife deeply despite everything, but I'm struggling to see a resolution where both of us get what we want. Some of you suggested we consider fostering or adoption, but when I briefly mentioned this, she dismissed it immediately, saying she wants her own baby and the full pregnancy experience again. The hardest part is that neither of us is technically wrong. She's allowed to change her mind about family size, and I'm allowed to maintain our original agreement. It just feels like there's no compromise possible when it comes to creating another human life, as many of you pointed out. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time and focusing on being the best dad I can be to our existing children. I'll update again after we've had a few counseling sessions, assuming she actually attends. Thank you all again for your support during this impossible situation. Now for the second update. Update 2. Can't believe I'm back with another update on this whole baby drama situation. These past few weeks have been absolute insanity. Thanks to everyone who reached out after my last post got locked. Still not sure why the mods did that, but I managed to read most of your comments before it disappeared. So we actually went to those marriage counseling sessions I mentioned, 2 of them so far, and honestly, they were eye-opening in ways I didn't expect. During the second session, my wife finally admitted what might really be going on. She said she's lost herself in motherhood. Now that our kids are getting more independent, she's struggling with her identity beyond being mom. Our counselor was pretty great about the whole thing. She suggested we take a 6-month break from the baby discussion completely. Instead, she wanted us to focus on helping my wife explore other sources of fulfillment and identity outside of having more children. I thought this was a fantastic idea, and to my surprise, my wife agreed to it. For a couple of weeks, things actually seemed to be improving. My wife enrolled in that graduate program she'd put on hold when our daughter was born. She also joined this women's social group at our community center that meets twice a week. We were talking more about normal stuff again. The kids definitely noticed the change too. Our son even asked why mommy was smiling more. I was starting to feel cautiously optimistic that maybe, just maybe, we could work through this. I know. Some of you told me I was being naive in your DMs, and well, you were right. Yesterday, I was at work when I got a call from my mother-in-law. Now, she and I have always gotten along pretty well, so I wasn't expecting anything weird. But then she asked why we were being so secretive about the new baby on the way. I literally had to ask her to repeat herself because I thought I'd misheard. She said something about being excited to be a grandmother again and asked when we were planning to make the announcement. I managed to keep my cool and just told her there must be some misunderstanding, thanked her for calling, and said I had to get back to work. Then I immediately requested to leave early, citing a family emergency. My supervisor's actually been pretty understanding throughout all this mess. Shout out to good bosses who don't make your personal crisis worse. I got home and found my wife in the kitchen making dinner like nothing was wrong. The kids were playing in the living room, so I kept my voice low and calmly asked why her mother thought she was pregnant. You should have seen how fast she froze up. After a long pause, she admitted she'd told her family we were trying for a third. Her reasoning? She thought the pressure from her entire family would somehow convince me to abandon my position on creating another human being. I explained how betrayed I felt that she'd undermined both our agreement and the counseling process we were supposedly committed to. That's when everything changed. Her whole demeanor shifted from apologetic to angry. She slammed down the wooden spoon she was holding and said, "I'm tired of waiting for permission to have the family I deserve. My sister just had her 4th child, and everyone keeps asking when we're having another." I stayed calm, probably the hardest thing I've ever done, and tried to explain that children aren't accessories or achievements to collect, that our existing kids deserved parents who weren't financially and emotionally stretched too thin. I thought I was being reasonable. Maybe you guys can tell me if I wasn't. That's when she dropped another bomb. She slid her phone across the table to show me an email confirming an interview for a teaching position in a district 2 towns over. Apparently, she'd been applying for higher-paying teaching jobs that offer subsidized fertility treatments in their health insurance packages. She'd researched all this without telling me. Then she casually mentioned she'd already researched sperm banks, just in case. I continued to refuse. I just stared at her, trying to process what I was hearing. "Are you seriously considering having a child with someone else while married to me?" I asked. I had to ask this question. Seriously, what the actual hell? She started talking about how she deserved to have another baby and how I was denying her happiness, and that sometimes compromises have to be made. I don't think she understood that using another man's sperm to have a baby your husband doesn't want isn't a compromise, it's relationship-ending insanity. The argument was escalating when suddenly our daughter appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes and asking why we were yelling. That snapped both of us back to reality pretty quick. We promised her everything was fine, the biggest lie, and took turns reading her a bedtime story. Our son had somehow slept through the whole thing, which was a small mercy. After the kids were in bed, I told my wife I needed some space and would be staying at my brother's apartment for a few days to think about the future of our marriage. I tried to be as calm and rational as possible, explaining that while I respected her desire for another child, and I genuinely do, I couldn't remain in a relationship where my boundaries were repeatedly disregarded and where deception had become the norm. She started crying, saying I was abandoning our family over one little disagreement about creating a whole new human being. I packed a bag while she followed me around the house, alternating between begging me to stay and accusing me of never loving her enough. I drove to my brother's place, feeling absolutely gutted about potentially breaking up our family. My brother's been great. He put fresh sheets on his pull-out couch and didn't ask too many questions when I showed up. But I just can't see how we move forward from here when my wife seems willing to have another child by any means necessary, with or without my consent or involvement. The hardest part is thinking about my kids. They don't deserve any of this. They didn't ask to be born into a family where their parents can't agree on something so fundamental. I've been FaceTiming them before bedtime, and my daughter keeps asking when I'm coming home. Cue the dad guilt hitting. I don't know what happens next. My brother thinks I should talk to a lawyer just to understand my options, not necessarily to file for divorce yet. Part of me still loves my wife and wants to believe we can work through this somehow. But another part of me knows some lines can't be uncrossed, and she's sprinted past several of them. I'm trying to stay strong and clear-headed about what's best for my existing children and myself in this impossible situation. Thank you all for listening to this mess of a saga. Your comments have helped me feel less crazy when I've been doubting myself at every turn. Now for the final update. Final update on the wife wants a third child saga. I still can't believe how this all ended. First, thank you to everyone who reached out after my last post. Your support meant everything during what has been the most insane few weeks of my life. So I spent a full week after that bombshell about my wife researching sperm banks. That week gave me some much-needed clarity. Amazing what a little distance can do. I decided to consult with both a family therapist and a lawyer to understand my options and responsibilities going forward. The lawyer especially helped me think through things I hadn't even considered yet: documentation, finances, custody arrangements. During that week, my wife's behavior became increasingly erratic. She called me literally dozens of times every day, and I mean dozens. The pattern was always the same. First, tearful apologies, then angry accusations when I wouldn't immediately agree to come home. The worst part was when I FaceTimed the kids and overheard her in the background telling our daughter that Daddy doesn't want us to be a complete family. I still wanted to give our marriage one last chance. 8 years together isn't something you just throw away without trying everything. So I agreed to meet my wife at the marriage counselor's office for a mediated discussion. I wasn't particularly optimistic, but I figured we needed a neutral third party to help us either find a path forward or at least separate amicably for the kids' sake. When I arrived at the counselor's office last Thursday, my wife was already there. She looked calm compared to the previous week. That should have been my first red flag. Hindsight is 20/20 and all that. What really threw me was seeing her sister sitting next to her. She claimed she was just there for emotional support, and our counselor reluctantly agreed to let her join since my wife seemed adamant about it. As the session began, I tried to express my feelings about the situation. The broken trust, the ultimatums, the deception. I barely got 3 sentences in when my wife's sister interrupted me and announced they had planned an intervention to help me understand the selfishness of my position, because apparently I'm the unreasonable one for not wanting to create another human being against my will. Her sister reached into her purse and pulled out what I immediately recognized as ultrasound pictures. At first, my brain couldn't process what was happening. Then she said the words that changed everything. "I'm acting as a surrogate for you two. I'm carrying your 3rd child." The room went completely silent. My wife was beaming. Her sister looked smug. Our counselor's jaw dropped. And me? I felt shocked. As the shock wore off slightly, my wife excitedly explained their perfect solution. Her sister had been secretly inseminated with donor sperm that matched my physical characteristics. This way, they could have another baby without risking my wife's health. And since I wasn't the biological father, I could be as uninvolved as I wanted. Her exact words, I swear. Our counselor, to her credit, immediately pointed out the enormous ethical problems with making such a life-altering decision without proper communication. She actually looked more upset than I was, probably because she'd spent weeks trying to help us communicate better only to witness this. I sat in stunned silence, probably only 30 seconds in reality. Then I managed to ask how far along the pregnancy was. 10 weeks. 10 weeks. They'd been planning this for months, right through our counseling sessions, when my wife was supposedly working on finding fulfillment outside of having more children. When I finally found my voice, I simply said, "I will not be raising this child as my own, and I will not remain married to someone who would make this decision without my consent." No yelling, no dramatics, just a calm statement of fact. She actually said, "You're bluffing. You'll fall in love with the baby once it arrives." That's when I knew with absolute certainty our marriage was over. Our counselor interjected before I could respond, explaining to my wife in her professional therapist voice that what she had done constituted a breach of trust that had likely damaged our marriage. My wife and her sister both started talking over each other, saying I was being dramatic and would get over it once I had time to process. Spoiler alert, I did not get over it. I stood up, thanked our counselor for her time, and walked out. Didn't look back, didn't engage with their calls and protests. I drove straight to our house, knowing my wife would be at the counselor's office for at least another 30 minutes. I quickly packed essentials, important documents, and irreplaceable items, including my grandmother's watch and family photos. I also took half the money from our joint account on my lawyer's advice and transferred it to a new account in just my name, not a penny more than what was fair. I didn't want to give her any reason to claim I was financially vindictive. The next morning, I filed for separation and contacted a family lawyer to begin divorce proceedings. I specified that I wanted joint custody of our 2 children, but would not accept parental responsibility for the child my sister-in-law was carrying. My lawyer warned me this might get complicated legally, but assured me we had a strong case given the circumstances. When my wife was served with the separation papers, reality finally seemed to hit her. She called me sobbing, saying she hadn't thought I would actually leave, that she just wanted our family to be complete, that she and her sister had done this out of love, that I was throwing away our marriage over one mistake. I simply told her all further communication should go through our lawyers unless it directly involved our children's immediate needs. Then I hung up. It's been 3 weeks now since that day at the counselor's office. I've rented a 2-bedroom apartment close to our kids' school. They stay with me 4 nights a week. The custody arrangement is working surprisingly well so far. My wife has finally stopped calling and texting constantly, though her family members have taken up the harassment campaign. I've blocked most of them at this point. The divorce proceedings are moving forward. My lawyer says this case is unique. There are complicated legal questions about my potential obligations to the child my sister-in-law is carrying. But since we're divorcing before the birth, and I have documentation proving I never consented to this arrangement, my lawyer is confident I won't be held financially responsible. The hardest part has been explaining the situation to our kids in an age-appropriate way. We've simply told them that sometimes grown-ups realize they need to live in separate houses to be happy, but that both of us still love them very much. They seem to be adjusting okay, though my daughter still asks when we're all going to live together again. Breaks my heart every time. Edit. A lot of people have been asking about my wife's sister and the baby situation. From what I've heard through mutual friends, they're proceeding with the pregnancy. My wife is telling everyone it's a blessing and that she's excited to raise the baby as a single mom. Her sister seems to have no regrets about her role in this mess. I genuinely hope that child has a good life, but I'm firm in my decision not to be involved. My responsibility is to the 2 children I already have. Looking back on this whole ordeal, I'm still processing the level of betrayal and manipulation I experienced. Therapy is helping. But I'm also finding unexpected peace in my new routine with the kids. I'm cautiously optimistic about what comes next, and I couldn't have gotten through this without all of your support and advice.